I never thought my marriage would end in front of an audience, especially not my in-laws, who once claimed I was the daughter they never had, but that's the thing about lies. They rot slowly, in whispers and glances, until one day the floor beneath you collapses, and mine collapsed during a dinner I had prepared with all my heart, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and my husband Daniel's favorite apple pie, when his parents, his sister, and her smug fiancé sat around my table smiling until Sylvia, my mother-in-law, leaned back with her signature smirk and asked in a voice dripping with pity, "So, Daniel told us you've been careless with money again," and I froze, pie knife in hand, staring at her, shocked, demanding to know what she meant, only for her to continue with poisoned sweetness. "Sweetheart, a family can't survive if one partner is reckless. The credit card bills, the shopping, Daniel says you're drowning them in debt," and I laughed bitterly, insisting it wasn't true, begging Daniel to tell them the truth, to show the bills, but he refused, staring at his plate, letting their judgment hang like a noose around my neck, and that night ended in slammed doors, whispered gossip, and the next morning Daniel told me to leave because space would be good, his family standing behind him with smug satisfaction. So I packed a bag with shaking hands and walked away from the house I had poured my soul into, staying with a friend and replaying it all in my head, until weeks later when I scoured our accounts and found the truth. Unauthorized charges, hidden withdrawals, a secret account Daniel had been draining with gambling and luxury purchases, while painting me as the villain, and rage mixed with heartbreak until I knew I had no choice but to file for divorce, which sent shockwaves through his carefully built lies, because when the papers were served he came pounding on my friend's door, pleading, "You don't have to do this," and I asked why he lied, why he let his family crucify me, and he confessed with downcast eyes that he couldn't face Sylvia's criticism, that he blamed me so she'd get off his back, and my stomach twisted at how easily he had sacrificed me to protect his ego, so I shut the door on him, and the divorce process began brutally, with his family spewing venom about me being irresponsible, unfaithful, even a thief. But in court my lawyer subpoenaed bank records and the truth burst wide open. Every gambling transaction, every trip to Vegas, every luxury purchase, all in his name, all tied to that secret account, and the judge declared his misconduct was entirely his responsibility while acknowledging I had been unfairly maligned. And Sylvia's face went ghostly white as she realized her golden boy had been lying all along, her judgment now turning toward him instead of me. But the real fallout came later when his gambling debts caught up and creditors circled like vultures, threatening lawsuits that dragged his family's savings and reputation down with him, while I quietly rebuilt my life in a small sunlit apartment overlooking a park, working a job I loved, surrounded by friends who reminded me who I was, and months later Sylvia appeared at my door, hair disheveled, eyes hollow, whispering that they had been wrong about me, begging for understanding. But I stood steady and told her it no longer mattered because I didn't need her approval and never had, closing the door with a calm that came from finally being free, free from the lies, free from their cruelty, and free to write the next chapter of my life on my own terms. After closing the door on Sylvia that evening I stood in silence for a long time, my hand resting on the doorknob, my chest rising and falling as if my body didn't yet know how to handle peace, and when I finally turned away I realized how much lighter the air felt without the weight of their approval hanging over me. But the world doesn't let wounds heal without testing them, and soon Daniel began circling back into my life, calling, texting, sometimes even showing up near my office, his messages a mixture of apologies and accusations, one moment begging me to reconsider, the next blaming me for ruining everything, as if the truth about his gambling and lies had been my fault. And though I ignored him at first, I knew deep down I hadn't heard the last of him, because men like Daniel don't let go easily when their pride is wounded. And sure enough, one night as I sat on my couch with a cup of tea, scrolling through emails, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that read, "You'll regret what you've done." And though my heart pounded, I refused to show fear, saving the number and documenting everything because I had learned the hard way that protecting myself meant being prepared. And not long after that, Daniel's sister Marissa appeared in my office lobby, her designer bag slung over her shoulder and her eyes sharp with that same superiority I remembered from family dinners. And she said through clenched teeth, "Do you realize what you've done to our family? Mom can't sleep, Dad's blood pressure is through the roof, Daniel is drowning, all because you couldn't keep our dirty laundry inside." And I stared at her with something between pity and anger as I replied, "Your brother lied, your brother gambled, your brother betrayed me. "I didn't do this." "He did." But she only scoffed and muttered, "You'll always be the problem," before storming off, leaving behind a faint perfume trail and a reminder of just how deep their denial ran. Yet part of me knew that time has a way of unmasking the truth, and cracks were already forming in their facade because whispers from mutual acquaintances reached me that Daniel's father had been forced to sell part of his business to cover debts, that creditors were now calling Marissa directly, that Sylvia had been spotted arguing loudly in the bank lobby, her face red as she tried to explain away unpaid balances. And still they clung to the narrative that I was somehow to blame, but instead of breaking me, those rumors strengthened my resolve, and I poured myself into building my independence, working late nights, saving every penny, and eventually securing a promotion that not only improved my finances but gave me a confidence I hadn't felt in years, the kind of confidence that radiates from knowing your worth is no longer tied to someone else's lies. And with that confidence came a shift because people began to notice the truth on their own. Colleagues who once whispered now rallied around me. Friends who had been cautious grew louder in their support. Even strangers in court who overheard fragments of the hearings began sharing sympathetic nods. And meanwhile Daniel's descent grew darker as I heard he had been evicted from an upscale apartment he tried to maintain alone. And one evening as I walked home from work I found him sitting on the curb outside my building, his suit wrinkled, hair unkempt, eyes bloodshot. And he looked up at me with a broken smile saying, "I don't know where else to go." And though a pang of old love and sorrow tugged at my heart, I forced myself to remember every night I had cried, every lie he had told, every cruel whisper from his family, and I said firmly, "You chose your path, Daniel, and you chose it without me," before walking past him, the sound of his muffled sobs following me into the lobby, and though it hurt it also healed because I knew this was closure, the kind that doesn't come in a single moment but in 1,000 decisions to stand tall. And in the weeks that followed life slowly blossomed again, with mornings where I woke to sunlight streaming through my window instead of dread, with laughter that returned to my throat like an old friend, and with the realization that strength isn't about never falling, it's about rising every time someone tries to bury you under lies. And I began to dream again of travel, of new places, of new people, and for the first time since the nightmare began I felt excited about what was to come. Instead of fearful, because their world had turned upside down while mine was just beginning to turn right side up. Life has a strange way of balancing itself, and while Daniel's world was unraveling thread by thread, mine was slowly weaving itself into something stronger, something more vibrant than I had dared imagine during those dark nights when I was accused of being reckless. And though the scars were still there, they were now reminders rather than wounds, pushing me forward instead of holding me back. Yet the universe wasn't done teaching lessons, because one afternoon as I sat in a cafe near my office, sipping coffee and reviewing documents, I overheard two women at the next table whispering Sylvia's name, and I tried not to listen but the words slipped through. "Her credit cards are maxed out. Can you believe it? She's even thinking of selling the vacation house." And another voice chimed in, "And Marissa canceled her engagement. Apparently her fiancé found out about the financial mess and didn't want to be dragged into it." And though a flicker of vindication ran through me, I quickly tamped it down because joy built on someone else's downfall never lasts. But what did last was the steady peace of knowing I had survived their cruelty and didn't need their destruction to validate me. Still, fate had more to reveal, and it came in the form of a letter. Yes, an actual letter delivered to my apartment, written in Sylvia's tight cursive, asking me to meet her at a quiet tea shop. And my first instinct was to toss it aside, but curiosity gnawed at me, so a week later I found myself sitting across from her, watching her stir her tea with trembling hands. And she looked nothing like the woman who had once sneered at me across the dinner table. Her elegance dimmed, her confidence shattered, and she said softly, "We've lost almost everything. Daniel owes more than we can ever repay. Marissa blames me for pushing her fiancé away, and Robert, her husband, barely speaks to me anymore. I came here not to beg but to say I'm sorry." And though the words caught me off guard, I listened as she confessed she had always seen me as competition, that my independence threatened her grip on Daniel, that she had chosen to believe his lies because it was easier than admitting her son was flawed. And I sat there absorbing it all, feeling years of pain swirl in my chest. And when she finished I said, "Your apology doesn't erase what happened, but it matters that you said it." And I stood to leave, her eyes glistening as she whispered, "I hope one day you'll forgive us." And as I walked out into the crisp air I realized forgiveness wasn't something I could give her in that moment, but maybe someday I could forgive myself for ever believing I needed her approval. And that night as I lay in bed I understood something deeper. Their world had turned upside down not just because of Daniel's mistakes but because they had built it on lies. And lies cannot be the foundation of a family, and meanwhile my own foundation, truth, resilience, and self-worth, was finally steady, and that stability opened doors because in the months that followed I traveled to places I had once only dreamed of, standing under the Eiffel Tower, walking the streets of Rome, sitting on a beach in Greece with a book in my hand and the sound of waves soothing my soul. And during one of those trips I met people who reminded me what it meant to live without fear. And one evening in Florence I sat with a group of strangers turned friends, laughing until my stomach hurt, and it struck me that I was no longer the woman who had been kicked out of her home over lies. I was someone reborn. And when I returned home I carried that light with me, pouring it into my work, my friendships, and eventually into a cautious but hopeful openness toward love again. And though Daniel's shadow still lingered in the occasional phone call or rumor, each time it reached me it felt weaker, like an echo fading into the distance. Because the truth was no longer chained to me, it belonged to him and him alone, and with every day that passed I felt more certain that their downfall had been inevitable, while my rise had been earned. And in that certainty I found not vengeance but peace, the kind that comes from knowing you don't need revenge when life itself delivers the justice you once prayed for in silence. Peace, however, has a way of being tested, and just when I thought the storm had fully passed another twist appeared, because one gray morning as I was leaving for work I found Daniel leaning against the wall near my building, thinner than I remembered, his once sharp suit replaced with a wrinkled jacket, and he looked at me with hollow eyes that carried both shame and desperation. And before I could tell him to leave he blurted out, "I signed the divorce papers but I can't sign away my guilt. I ruined everything, and now I have nothing," and I stood frozen for a moment, part of me aching for the man I had once loved while the other part steeled itself against his manipulations. And I finally replied, "You chose lies over love, and until you face that truth nothing will change." But instead of arguing he surprised me by nodding slowly, almost as if hearing it aloud broke something inside him, and he whispered, "I don't deserve forgiveness but I needed you to know I'm sorry," then turned and walked away, leaving me trembling in the morning chill, unsure if I felt closure or just another layer of sadness for the years I had lost. Yet as days passed I realized it didn't matter whether he found redemption because his journey was no longer tied to mine. And meanwhile whispers of his family's collapse continued to reach me, how Robert sold more assets to cover debts, how Marissa moved abroad to escape the scandal, how Sylvia became reclusive, hardly leaving the house, her once loud opinions silenced by the weight of humiliation. And though people sometimes asked if I felt vindicated I always said the same thing. Vindication doesn't come from watching others fall, it comes from standing tall when they tried to break you. And I was standing taller than ever, because my career soared with new projects, my circle of friends widened with people who valued honesty, and even my heart, cautious as it was, began to trust again when I met Alex. A kind and steady man who listened more than he spoke and treated me not as someone to control but as someone to cherish. And our conversation stretched late into the night, filled with laughter, curiosity, and dreams. And one evening as we walked hand in hand along the park near my apartment I told him about my past, the lies, the betrayal, the divorce that turned their world upside down, and instead of pity or judgment he said, "You survived hell and still have light in your eyes. That's not weakness, that's strength." And for the first time in years I believed it, not because I needed to hear it but because I finally knew it was true. And as seasons changed I embraced a new rhythm of life filled with travel, work, love, and the simple joy of waking up without dread. And sometimes in quiet moments I would remember that night at the dinner table when Sylvia accused me of being reckless, when Daniel sat silent and let the lies strangle me, and I would shake my head at the irony because in the end their lies hadn't caged me, they had freed me, and their downfall wasn't my revenge, it was their own creation, while my freedom was my triumph. A reminder that even when the world kicks you out over lies, you can rebuild, you can rise, and you can turn your pain into a story that ends not with bitterness but with hope. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories, and as months rolled into years I found that the ache of betrayal no longer lived in my chest like a wound but instead like a scar, faint and painless, a reminder of battles fought and survived. And in that space I flourished, building a life filled with meaning, laughter, and choices that were mine alone. Yet sometimes fate brings ghosts back into the light. And one afternoon I received a letter from Robert, Daniel's father, requesting a meeting, and curiosity, mixed with a quiet strength that told me I could face whatever came, led me to accept. So we met in a modest cafe far from the grandeur he once flaunted, and the man who sat across from me was no longer the confident patriarch but a weary figure with tired eyes, and he spoke without preamble. "I owe you an apology, we all do, but I wanted you to hear it from me before it's too late. I believed my son because it was easier than questioning him. I defended him because I thought family loyalty meant blindness, but loyalty without truth is destruction, and we destroyed you." And I listened quietly, the clinking of cups around us filling the pauses, and finally I said, "What you destroyed didn't break me, it freed me, and I hope you learn from that before you lose what little you have left." And he nodded, tears welling, whispering, "I already have." And as I walked away from that cafe I felt a strange sense of finality, as if the last thread tying me to their world had been cut, and from then on I stopped looking back, choosing instead to invest fully in the life blooming before me, where Alex and I built memories of kindness instead of cruelty, where friendships thrived on trust, where work became more than survival. It became fulfillment, and one evening as the sun dipped low over the city skyline and Alex slipped a simple ring onto my finger, promising not perfection but partnership, I realized that love after ruin is not only possible but often more beautiful, because it's built on truth. And when we married in a small ceremony filled with genuine laughter and warmth, I looked around the room and felt the presence of a family. Not the one I had lost, but the one I had chosen, the one that had chosen me. And in that moment I finally understood that sometimes being kicked out is the greatest gift, because it forces you to walk through doors you never would have opened otherwise. And though I would never forget the lies that once turned my life upside down, I would forever treasure the way my divorce turned their world upside down too, not out of vengeance but as proof that the universe has a way of balancing scales. And as I stood there, a new chapter beginning, I silently thanked the storm for teaching me to dance in the rain, because without it I might never have learned how strong, how resilient, and how worthy of happiness I truly am.